scary stories. My story starts 4 years ago, and is still kinda happening. Lucas was the bus driver who drove the kids from my village to school next to town every day. He always was the nice bus driver, as there was a grumpy and moody one who sometimes switched shifts with him. A lot of people thought he was cool and always polite. I was 17 when there was some heavy rain in the afternoon when I was on my way home and I arrived at the station in town. Lucas was already there. As he noticed me, he let me in the bus and we started a conversation. I felt uncomfortable first, but he was always a good talker, so the weird feeling had gone soon. At one point he asked me about my then ex-boyfriend. He saw us together and the two of them used to talk when he was still in school. He was 21 at the time, already working. I told him that we broke up and that it was for the better. Then we continued talking about school. We started to talk every now and then, and after a while he asked me for my phone number, so I could maybe text him if I'm late for the bus or I need a ride in general. I found out that he was married, had 3 kids. He claimed to be 33, but later he said over 40. I never really found out how old he actually was. The day after we exchanged numbers, he texted me that he was going to take a bath and said that there would be enough space for 2. I replied that he should ask his wife about that, and he then said, "She is out of town, so I am pretty lonely." We left it at that. One time later, like 2 weeks later, I saw him and a young girl during his break making out. I sent him a message telling him that it's not the way a married man should talk to younger girls. He replied that he had explained to me later his wife didn't want to have sex with him since the birth of his 3rd child. He has multiple young girlfriends all around my age. When I asked him why he wouldn't look for someone closer to his age, he replied, "Girl, you don't know where to find the honey. Girls your age need a proper man, someone who can give it to 'em. Boys that age are no good, but girls are so sweet." We then talked about my ex, who he said was a nice guy, but could have never made me happy. I was a rebellious, moody teen, so I actually never listened to adults. Some things he told me made me think. I couldn't get it out of my head. I started to believe the twisted things he said to me. I thought he was in the right and it would be better for his marriage if he would have little girlfriends. The next day, I had school until the evening. I had to take the last bus home, and because my sleeping schedule was terrible, I fell asleep in the bus. I woke up when the bus was already empty, Lucas standing next to my seat. It was already dark outside, so I had no idea where we were. He sat down, started talking, and kissed me at some point. I asked him to stop, and that I wasn't here to become one of his girlfriends. "Then why did you stay in the bus?" "I canceled someone else for you. You don't want me to be sad, do you?" And for some stupid reason, I believed him. He was the adult. He was in the right. We had sex because he made me feel guilty. I felt terrible afterwards and wanted to stop contact, but he was the one who brought me to school every day, so it was difficult to avoid him. The entire thing went on for months. Him making me feel guilty, giving me compliments, and making me feel worthless at the same time. Showering me in presents and telling me that he invested so much money in me, and it would be rude to say no to him because of that. He wants me. I'm the best he ever had. I am not allowed to leave. The time I managed to get out of the situation is because of my cat. When I tried to sneak back into my house, she started meowing, and my parents woke up, took my phone, and found the not yet deleted messages from him. They were furious. I was angry and tried to defend him. I did not want him to get in trouble. They made me change my number and read through the phone calls I made, checking that his number wouldn't show up again. I met him again. He forced me to give him my new number, and he texted me with a different one. My father noticed the amount of texts to a new number, but believed me that it was for a school project. I asked Lucas to stop, that it's too dangerous. I met my new boyfriend for a few weeks after that, and managed to end things with Lucas, for now. I changed my number again, but he got it somehow, probably from my ex. I changed it again. A few weeks later, I saw his car in my neighborhood. He did not know where I lived exactly, but he was pretty close to my house. I managed to hide myself. Later, I got a text that he was in my village, hoping to see me. He somehow got my number again. I changed it one last time, and it suddenly stopped. I thought that would be it. Fast forward to May last year. I'm 21, have a different boyfriend who happened to live close to Lucas' house. One day, he saw me. He texted me again, telling me that the same things he did all the time. I was scared. I had no idea how he managed to get my number again. It must have been my ex, who happened to be in the same theater group, but I never actually gave him my number, so he probably asked around and then told Lucas. My boyfriend noticed my reaction, and I finally told someone the whole story. He couldn't understand how I could still defend Lucas. His manipulation was pretty good. I almost gave in and agreed to meet Lucas. The next day, I saw his car in my village a few times, received texts from him, and somehow managed to tell him to leave me alone. I moved to another town and blocked him everywhere. It's been since July 2016 that I last heard of him, and I am in therapy now. So, I hope it's the end of the story, and I will never see him again. I was 10 years old, lived in the deep south. Me and my parents lived in the woods, in a little house a couple of miles from the tiny little town where I grew up. To get to our house, you had to turn down a paved road, travel approximately a mile, and we lived in the woods down a short dirt road to the left. There were other homes sort of nearby, but woods separated all of us, so there was lots of privacy. It was summer. I was bored because until I learned to drive, my summers were incredibly boring. My mom was not sociable, so I only had company or visited rarely, and we went to church and we went shopping once a week in the nearest major city. But other than that, me and my mom just stayed at home, alone. In this little town, most people didn't even lock their doors. It was and still is probably one of the safest towns in America. So in the summer, we would have the doors open and windows open, nothing locked, never dreaming that our safety could be threatened. One day, my uncle, his wife, and 3 kids showed up. His kids were my age, and I was excited. My mom never looked forward to these visits. She just was not social, and our house was tiny. The kids had to camp out in the living room. She knew my uncle was coming, but he wasn't due for another couple of weeks, but for some reason he decided to come early. It was summer evening. Me and my 3 cousins were out running around in the yard, playing like kids do, when my cousins got to arguing. My uncle was in the living room. He called them in and made them sit down for a while, until they could learn to behave. I stayed outside and practiced cartwheels. something I was desperately trying to learn before school started back. I noticed that this big guy came walking into the yard. He was carrying a limb. He walked up on the porch and knocked on the screen door. My mom came to the door, and he told her he was lost. He said he was staying with some people, and he wasn't from here, and he went to the store with them, and they drove off and left him, and he didn't know how to get back to their house. My mom, she told him that she would call this lady that lived down the road from us and asked if our teenage sons would drive down and pick him up and help him get back to where he was staying. My mom left him standing on the porch and walked away to make the phone call, and he did something that I thought was a little strange. He opened the screen door and stuck his head in, looking around. Of course, he saw my uncle, who was this big, strong, stocky guy sitting on the couch. Mom called this lady. Her boys drove up and got him pretty quickly, and he was gone. We didn't think much of it until my uncle and family left because we were too busy and I was having fun. But after my uncle's family left at the end of the week, we found out some things. First of all, we found out this guy was not lost at all. A relative that lived at the end of the road where you turn off to head toward our house said he's seen that guy walk past his house 2 or 3 times in a row. And he would stay for a while, then he would walk back by. Then the lady whose son gave this guy a ride, she called my mom a few days after this happened, and she said he told her sons exactly how to get to where he was staying. She also told my mom that me and her needed to stay in the house and keep the doors locked because this young man was up to no good. I believe he had been watching and saw a petite woman and a little girl home alone all day with doors unlocked and unassuming of danger. Anyway, I've always wished my mom would have asked these boys' mother why she felt that this guy was dangerous to us, but my mom just didn't. But anyway, creepy stranger who came into our yard that day, let's never meet again. When I was 17 years old, I was intrigued by computers and everything the internet had to offer. I soon found out about Yahoo chat rooms, back when they were used primarily. I would talk to a few people on there, including a friend I made which became a friend in real life even to this day. So I didn't think anything bad would happen to me. No one ever thinks that, especially on the internet. I met this one guy named Daniel. At the time, he was 28 years old. Him and I became friends very quick, and I felt like I could tell him anything like I knew him forever. Our conversation would last forever, and I ended up telling him more than I probably should ever tell anyone. One of the conversations I had mentioned that I was trying to go to school to become a computer engineer and was trying to find a job in the field to better suit my understandings. He then told me he had his own computer company and that he was trying to find some help. As a naive woman who was trying to find work in her field, I wanted to take the offer. I talked to my family members about it, and despite their reasoning, I took the job offer. I will be the first to admit that my family were not strict at all. My mom did not like the idea, but she said that I was going to do it anyways, and that at least she knew where I was going. I probably would have been more grateful if she would have put her foot down. The job was located in New Jersey, and I lived in Texas. Fast forward to about 6 months later. This was when things went from good to worse. He was still trying to get his business off the ground, but kinda started slacking at it. To make extra income, I would help others that needed it with their networking and their computers. It was a way to get out of the house since I was not allowed to leave the house without his knowledge or consent. I just figured he was protecting me since I was still unfamiliar with the city. Once I turned 18 years old, things started to get even worse out of nowhere, when he would tell me how to eat my food and to be a proper lady. He would yell at me if I accidentally scraped my fork against my teeth and little things like that. He would hack into my laptop to keep an eye on me and see who I was talking to and what I was doing. Every time my family members would call me, I had to talk to them in front of him. Things started getting so bad that I started staying at work longer hours just so I didn't have to go home. I would never mention this to my coworkers because I didn't want them to pry into my business. It wasn't until later that they found out on their own. One of my coworkers has a huge crush on me and always worried about me when it was time to go home. He knew that I would rather work a double shift than go home, and that made him worried. I honestly wish I stayed in contact with him. He was one of the best friends a girl could ask for. I started getting into MMORPG games since they took me out of the reality I was living in at the moment. I met this guy on there, and it made me feel good to have someone to talk to finally. I never meant anything by it. It was just an escape. Daniel found out about the stuff I would say to him and said that I was cheating on him, which I never did such a thing. Until this moment, I never believed that he would go psychotic on me or even hurt me. I figured he would just yell at me and try to scare me. One day he got so fed up with all of it and grabbed my cell phone and broke it in half. He looked at me and said, "Now you have no way to tell your family what you did to me." I was literally terrified at this point. He threatened me a little more, and I started crying. I figured that was the end of it, but I was completely wrong. The next day, I packed a small bag and told him that my job would allow me to do some book work while it was slow. It was a bag of some clothes I could find in a hurry. I got to work and told my coworkers what was going on. They gave me a phone and I called my grandfather, who got me a flight to Texas as soon as he could. I was so grateful for him and everyone at work. When I got to the airport in Texas, I was greeted by my family members. I called Daniel and told him that I was in Texas and I didn't want to be with him anymore. He laughed and said, "There is no way you could have got back to Texas that fast. Come home, now." I assured him that I was not coming back to him. My mom got on the phone and told him the same. I don't know what him and my mom were talking about, but she got very angry and told him to never speak to me again and hung up. I wish I could say that that was the last time I ever spoke to Daniel, but it wasn't. My mom got a new phone to replace the one that Daniel had broken, and somehow Daniel got my number. He would call and threaten me. One time he called and my mom answered and put it on speaker. He said, "You better put her on a fucking plane back to New Jersey or I will come down there and get her myself." I almost had tears in my eyes even thousands of miles away. He still terrified me. My mom replied, "I will wait for you to come and get her. There is a body bag with your name on it." After that, the calls became less and he wasn't harassing me as much anymore. It took about 2 months for him to finally stop calling me, and I was able to move on with my life. I do not talk to people the same way I used to anymore, and I watch what I say to anyone now.
My dad owns a construction company, and during the summer I used to work there for some extra cash. Mostly my job was to clean and assist the supervisors with whatever they needed. It was hard work, with unbearably hot conditions due to Alabama summers, but it paid well and gave me something to do. I was the only female who worked there, and so it was not uncommon for creeps to mess with me. Currently, I am 24. This particular incident happened when I was 16, during the first year of working this job. Now, for those who don't know, construction companies usually have their own employed workers to oversee the construction, while other companies are hired to do specialty work, such as electricity, plumbing, painting, etc. so the job site is filled with complete strangers who are there to do their job and then go home. They rarely try to strike up a conversation with you or even acknowledge your existence. Well, most of the time. We were in the middle of building a 3-story high church. There were 2 stairways, and my job was to scrub all the steps down with a toothbrush. This was tedious, and the easiest thing to do was for me to just sit on the steps as I worked. This meant I was unintentionally out of sight, and I worked quietly. I'm about halfway down the stairs, and there's a landing at the halfway point where pipes and AC ducts are running through the walls. I could hear a man cursing to himself as he attempted to install a pipe. I could not see him yet, but I could hear him. I didn't give it a second thought and continued quietly working. As I scooted further down the stairs, the man noticed me. He begins to apologize, saying things like, "Oh, I didn't see you there. I'm sorry for my language. If I had seen you, I wouldn't have said that." I glance up and see what this guy looks like. He's obviously not one of our workers, but belongs to one of the other companies we had hired. He looks to be about in his 40s. I reassure him that it's fine and that I hear worse in school. He chuckles at this, and we both begin working again. He then starts to make small talk, asking which school I go to, how old I am, is one of the construction workers my dad, etc. I'm not in the mood for small talk, but I do my best to answer him politely, while also being very short with him, hoping he realizes I don't really want to be bothered. When I answered his question with my age, with "I'm 16, he looks intensely at me and says, "You're 16 and already married?" My mind immediately goes into what the fuck mode. Why would he think that that statement was a perfectly normal one to make, despite the fact that it had nothing to do with our conversation? He sees my confused expression and grins, clarifying, "Your ring." At the time, I had a silver band ring that I wore on my left finger, giving the appearance of a wedding ring. I simply wore it there because that's the finger it fit best. I'm immediately uncomfortable with how things are going. I'm at least 15 feet away from him, and he still somehow noticed that small ring on my finger. Him questioning me about marriage was already unsettling in itself. I'm a 16-year-old kid, and he's old enough to be my dad. I explain that it's not a wedding ring. He laughs at that and says, "All of us men should consider ourselves lucky then." I scrunch my face and unsure of what he means, or rather, or not, it's an insult. He explains, "Because you are still single, I mean." Officially uncomfortable, I turn back around and begin furiously cleaning the stairs and praying that this guy finishes what he's doing so I can leave. I refuse to move down the stairs any further until he is gone. I don't want to get closer to him. Several uncomfortable questions later, the guy seems to finish and leaves. I breathe in a sigh of relief and work on finishing the stairs. About 10 minutes later, the guy comes back with a cold bottle of Mountain Dew and holds it right in front of my face. I gingerly take it, and he says, "It's pretty hot in here. You look like you need it." "Thanks," I replied. He then goes back to working in the stairwell, while I just sit there and stare at my drink in my hand. It was strange. There's no electricity or AC in the building. This church is in the middle of nowhere. No gas stations or stores are close by. There's no vending machines out there either. It's toward the end of the day, so the ice in everyone's coolers has long since melted, and all their personal drinks are hot. Yet this Mountain Dew is as cold as ice. Cautiously, I open the bottle and quickly realize that the lid has already been cracked from someone opening it. They obviously tried to reclose it in an attempt to hide the fact that it had been opened. I peer into the bottle to see something at the bottom of it. I quickly make the decision not to drink any of this. The guy has been watching me and questions why I haven't drank it yet. I just flat out ignore him and act like I didn't hear his question. Out of the corner of my eye, I realize that he hasn't brought any of his tools back with him, and that at first glance, he looks like he's working, but when I pay close attention, I see that he's not actually doing anything. He's just making the motions of doing work while watching me when he thinks I'm not looking. He keeps insisting I have some of the drink because it's so hot, and I look like I'm going to overheat. When he is unable to get a response from me, he changes tactics and attempts small talk again, while I frantically try to think of how to get out of this situation. This part of the building is completely deserted. It's when I choose to clean those stairs first, so I wouldn't have to work around the other workers. The chances of someone walking through are non-existent. You're working here with your dad, right? Who's your dad? A maniacal grin spreads across his face as I realize he is just giving me a way out. I answer, Calvin, the owner of this construction business. His face turns pale, and in a reedy voice says, "Oh, the big boss, huh?" He quickly decides he has somewhere else to be. He didn't attempt to interact with me for the rest of the day, but I did catch him staring intently at me whenever we were in the same room. I threw away the Mountain Dew. So, creepy guy who tried to give me the Mountain Dew, let's never meet again.
I am a 27-year-old female, and this happened to me when I was 24. I live in Los Angeles and have for my entire life. I was feeling lonely, so I decided to go on Craigslist to try to find someone to hang out with. Not necessarily to date, but someone to just chill with. If it led somewhere, then so be it. That was my thinking. I emailed a few guys, one of which stood out to me. He sent me some pictures, and I was fine with how he looked, and he seemed nice enough. We agreed to meet and go have coffee. It took him a lot longer than he said it would to get there, and once he did arrive, I instantly regretted what I was doing. But, being overly nice, I got in his car, and instead of heading to Starbucks as we planned, he drove to a CVS. I was like, what are you doing? To which he said he had to return some stuff to CVS so that he'd have money. I was super uncomfortable already and just wanted to get out of there, but again, my shyness got the better of me, and I just waited it out. Once he returned whatever it was he was returning, he then said he had to stop by his apartment. We pulled into this underground garage, and he said he'd be right back. You don't know how badly I wish I had run right then while he was gone, but I didn't. He got back in his car, and I could tell right away that he was high on something. Having been to rehab before myself, it was blatantly obvious. I told him that I'd gotten an emergency phone call while he was upstairs and that I was sorry, but I had to be taken back. I told him he could just drop me off at the nearest train station. I lived in a city like an hour away, so I wasn't about to have him drive me all the way home. We got on the freeway. That was the fastest route to the main stop. But we ended up passing the exit. I told him a few miles ahead of time which one it was, but he did not say anything. He just ignored me. I thought maybe he just hadn't heard me. Hey, that was the exit, actually. You passed it, I said. Instead of pulling over to the right lanes, he kept pulling further and further over to the left until we were all the way in the far left-hand lane. I asked him what he was doing, trying to keep my cool. I can't honestly remember his exact words, but it went something along the lines of, I'm not dropping you off. We're having sex. Why do you think I did this? I looked at him with my jaw to the ground and asked him, So, you are refusing to drop me off? I asked him. "Yes," he said, and then he sped up his car. The first thing I thought was obviously calling the police, so I pulled my cell out. He turned towards me and hit me in the face hard, and I dropped my phone because I was so shocked. The phone had fallen somewhere below his seat somewhere. I couldn't get to it. I was panicking. As we continued to drive, I tried desperately to think of what I should do. We came up on another interstate. For some reason, seeing the freeways intersect and seeing that we were about to get on yet another freeway was hugely ominous to me, and I decided I could not let him get on the next freeway. I couldn't get out of the car, so I did the only thing I could think of. I took a breath, grabbed the steering wheel, turning it as hard as I could to the right. He was so shocked he didn't even try to grab it back from me. As we crashed into one, then another car, and crashed into the side barrier, he turned towards me and started hitting me while screaming, "You fucking bitch! You fucked up everything!" I put my legs up to block the blows from his fist. I ended up falling backwards out of the car after managing to put my hand up and open the door. I ran to one of the cars we had crashed into that had pulled over behind us. The guy in the car had his phone out, presumably calling the cops. I knocked on his window screaming that this psycho tried to kidnap me, and he rolled it up all the way. I couldn't believe it. When I looked back, Psycho was coming towards me. So I said, "Fuck it, clearly no one is going to help," and ran towards the fence and was even weaker because of what had happened. So literally had to lean on the fence until it bent enough for me to fall over. Climbing up a chain-link fence was not an option at that moment. Luckily, instead of him following me, he ran the other direction. He just left his car on the side of the freeway. Once I was over the fence, I realized that I was on the same horse trails that I was familiar with because I had worked at the equestrian center nearby. So I just walked through the miles of trails until I got into the nearest city, which was Burbank, and called the police from a bowling alley. I never found out what happened to that psycho. The cops never told me after I made the report, but I hope he got arrested for, trying to kidnap and rape me. So, crazy, sadistic psycho rapist, let's never, ever meet again. This happened to me about a month and a half ago. For some context, I enjoy working out 4 or 5 times a week. I go to a CrossFit gym that is relatively small, so the warm-up rounds are usually done outside. The gear is near a street that's surrounded by trees at both sides, and the road stretches for about a mile, which is a great place for the gym goers to run on and is, in fact, encouraged on some days. I am also a short female and I don't look fit, since I am on the chubby side. This, however, always gave me a false sense of security, since in my head I didn't look like the traditional standard of beauty, therefore I wouldn't be a focal point for any creeps. Clearly, I was wrong. I got to the gym this morning. When I read the routine on the board, the warm-up said we had to go down the previous mentioned road. It was actually a pretty warm and sunny day, so I decided to go and do it. It wasn't the first time I went alone down that road, and my biggest worry so far was getting caught up in the rain, which wasn't a concern on that particular morning. I grabbed my phone and my headphones to listen to some music on my warm-up jog, as usual, and immediately went out of the gym to begin the small walk between the gym building and the beginning of that road. Halfway there, this car passes me and slows down, driving at the speed I was talking. He honks his horn several times to get my attention, and I turned to look, thinking he needed directions or something. But when I looked, he gave me this wide, unsettling grin, waved at me, and drove off. At that moment, I didn't think anything of it, since, as a female, I do get the occasional honk or inappropriate comment about my bounce and things like that when I'm outside warming up. So I simply shrugged it off, turned up the volume on my music, and continued heading towards the intersection that connects to the road. What started to give me creepy vibes was that as I am walking to said intersection, I noticed the same car waiting at the red light. As soon as the red light turned green, the car did a U-turn and headed back towards my direction. Once more, slowing down his speed. He looks at me with that creepy grin, eyeing me up and down, and making me feel exposed. I felt my heart begin to race, but I tried to ignore it since he was going in the opposite direction as me now. And besides, it was the middle of the day where other cars were passing by, so he wouldn't try anything. At least that's what I tried to convince myself of. By this time I had reached the intersection, so I turned onto the road and began to jog alongside it. I was a little concerned by this dude literally going out of his way to look at me, but I tried to concentrate on keeping my pace and my breathing at a steady rate, using my music to keep me distracted. Not 2 minutes had passed when I see, on the opposite side of the road, the same car slowing down beside me again. This meant he had made another U-turn somewhere, took the lights at the intersection again, and then turned to the same direction I was jogging towards. The man driving looked right at me with that stupid grin. He said some words to me that I didn't really catch since I had my volume pretty high before he sped off once more. Alright, at this point I'm starting to freak out because he's gone out of his way twice. I am hyper aware of my heartbeat as I feel a wave of panic begin to wash over me. I suddenly realize that I am just starting my jog down this road, where there are no buildings around, no place to hide, and I am completely alone. Right up the hill on the road there's another intersection that can't be seen from where I currently am, but something was telling me that this dude was going to make yet another U-turn and make a pass at me again. I see another jogger a little up ahead, and since I really want to do this workout, I decide to catch up to him. In my head, I figured he must have been one of the gym goers if he was running up that road, so maybe I could jog with him and have some company. I picked up my pace to get to him faster eventually. I do, but I don't recognize him. Remember, my gym is rather small, so the faces get pretty familiar rather quickly. Still, I hoped he was maybe a new member or just one of the few I hadn't yet met. I just wanted an excuse not to be alone. So I asked him if by any chance he goes to the gym down the road, not wanting to be too specific in case he ended up also being a creep. But he tells me no. I thank him anyway and decide to go back down to the gym. There is no way I am running up this lonely street by myself with some stranger following me in his car. God only knows what his intentions are, but considering his expression, I wasn't willing to take the risk and find out. As I am headed down the road, on my way back, the car passes me yet again, just as I had expected. He had gotten to the second intersection and he had made a U-turn, still slowing down his speed to drive at my pace, his eyes looking at me as if I was absolutely naked in front of him. He was closer to me now, and I could see through the window that while his left hand was on the wheel, his right hand was on his lap, gripping something in it. I quickly looked away, fearing that what I thought I saw was actually what I saw. I didn't want to confirm my suspicion, but I was clearly shaken. My jog turned into running when he speeds off. I am literally at the verge of a panic attack, only focusing on how the hell am I going to reach the gym safely. Sure, it wasn't that far away, but I obviously couldn't outrun a car. I turn off my music and call my best friend on the phone. I don't know why I did that, since she's overseas studying and there was no way for her to help me. I should have instead called the police. But my panic-ridden brain was only thinking about getting back safe and having someone keep me company, even if only on the phone in the meantime. While I wait for her to pick up the phone, I notice the first intersection up ahead. But to my horror, the car was on the very left lane, waiting for the light to turn green. Finally, my friend picks up the phone, and hearing her voice alleviates some of my panic. My eyes were trying to focus on both the car and where I was stepping as I ran. I needed to be careful, of course, and then the light turned green. The car began to move, and yes, did a fourth U-turn. I am trying my hardest to explain the situation to my best friend with breathless, panicky words, when I see the man pass by me again with those eyes and that grin that sends chills down my spine every time I think about it. Luckily, I was nearing the intersection and I could already see my gym about 400 meters away. My best friend kept telling me to breathe and to try and calm down. 200 meters. I am searching around to see if I can spot that car again. I can only hear my ragged breath. Every car that passes by makes me flinch. I was too jumpy, too panicked by the whole ordeal. Nothing like this had ever happened to me before. 50 meters. I am so close that one last burst of adrenaline makes me run even faster. I finally reach the building and climb up the steps to the second floor, where the gym is, and burst through those doors. Finally, I made it. I was safe. My body begins to relax as soon as I enter into the familiar, comforting space. My adrenaline was crashing fast, leaving more room for my anxiety to settle in. I tell my friend goodbye since I wanted to tell my coach about the situation and quickly hang up the phone. Before I could find my coach, however, I fell into a full-blown panic attack. I started to hyperventilate. My body was shaking so badly that I collapsed in a ball on the floor and sobbed uncontrollably, not caring that everyone was watching me. All I could do was try to reassure myself that I was now safe and that everyone would be all right. But I am never going down that road alone again.